Alright everyone, it's Hugh here again, and tonight I have a really cool video about making horror movies or making viral horror movies. This time last year, myself and my lovely girlfriend Jenny got together and decided to try and make a little movie which I thought could have been a viral horror movie. Unfortunately, I was wrong. The movie didn't go viral, but it did do okay. So I'm going to talk to you now about how I went about creating this idea for a short horror film, which I did this time last year, and where I went wrong. How, if I had perhaps changed a few things, I may be riding on a viral horror movie hit. Okay, let's get stuck into it. So why would you choose horror over another genre? Horror movies can go viral. They're very popular. Just look at what's on Netflix, what everybody is watching. There's a big demand for horror. And in terms of shareability as well, people like to share horror. If people see something creepy that scares the absolute hell out of them, there's a good chance they're going to share that. So it's a good idea to make horror movies. So the first thing I want to talk about is coming up with an idea. So basically what happens in this short movie is there's a couple. They're watching TV, they're about to go to bed soon. The girl hears weird sounds coming from upstairs. She goes to investigate because the boyfriend is asleep, me in this case. She notices that the window is ajar. There's a bit of rattling going on in the blinds. Thinks nothing of it. And then all of a sudden, we, the viewer, realise that she's not alone in the bedroom. Something happens to her, something pretty bad, but we don't know what it is. Then the boyfriend goes to investigate. He thinks his girlfriend is playing this prank on him with the sheet covered over her. Little do we know that his girlfriend is actually under the bed, pretty much dead, or almost, and ultimately a big jump scare is revealed. It's such a simple story that I decided not to actually get actors, and Jenny, my girlfriend, actually wanted to, try something. She's never acted before. And lo and behold, we got the use of a nice little country house down by the sea as well. So instead of trying to make a big deal of this movie and get a big crew, I just decided to do it on my own, film myself and film Jenny, light it myself, do the audio myself, literally do everything myself. And that's not easy. But with a few little tricks and techniques, you can actually make it work. So if you're shooting a movie with yourself in it, or even if you just want to get really smooth tracking shots, the first thing I'd recommend is getting yourself some sort of camera slider, which will allow a little bit of camera movement and dynamics in the shot when you're not actually behind the camera. Now I'm using a slider here from iFootage. It's called the Shark Nano slider. Now I've been using this slider recently and I used it on a corporate shoot and it's absolutely fantastic. I'm not just saying it, it really is. It's so compact and there's no programming involved. It's very, very handy. Now I didn't have this slider at the time, so I used my other slider, the one I have for years, which is the Rhino slider. And that was great to have for those shots that I was in myself because it just gave it a little bit of movement. And when you have a little bit of movement, you kind of it just makes the shot a little bit more interesting. Now you don't need to have movement. If you don't have a slider, it's fine. Once you can position the camera in a nice place. So one thing you should do when you're making a short horror movie is, and I did it in this video to varying success, what way can you shoot something to make it as creepy as possible? And in this case with Come to Bed, this country house down by the sea was just a perfect location for shooting a horror movie. It had lots of big dark rooms which, when the lights turned off, allowed you to position the camera out of the room that you were shooting the actor in, leaving the viewer with this big impression of a scary, creepy house where God knows what could be lurking around. So the location was ideal. As it happens, we were there during a thunderstorm. So I ran outside with my camera and I set it to film the house and the background. And lo and behold, I captured an authentic piece of lightning, which was just brilliant to get on camera. So that was something that I was able to add into the little movie. I just want to give a quick mention to the sponsor of this video. I've always wanted a good film emulation plugin, but I've never really gotten around to getting my hands on one. So when the nice people at Dehancer asked me if I wanted to try out their software, I took them up on that offer. Now I've barely scratched the surface of what Dehancer can do, but from what I can tell so far, it's a seriously intricate and multifaceted plugin that's of huge benefit to us filmmakers who want to take the digital edge off our cameras and get more filmic results. With Dehancer, there's loads of film prints to choose from and a huge amount of tweakability thereafter. and you can use it as full on or as subtle as you want. Here I've used it on a node just to add the tiniest little bit of grain to the shots of myself. For more information on Dehancer, check out their website, and also I'm going to link a video in the description below by a guy called Rob Ellis who goes into great detail on what this fabulous plugin can do. Now back to the video. One thing that I really struggled with in this short film was lighting. Now, if you've heard of a director called Roger Deakins, he uses this effect for lighting called the cove lighting effect, where essentially they bounce light on a curved white wall opposite the actors, and it gives this lovely wrapped around sort of lighting effect. Some of the Conjuring style James Wan movies, if you watch them, they have this kind of insipid sort of overhead lighting. It's almost like when you're doing photography and you bounce a flash off the ceiling. You get this sort of overhead lighting that can look nice and even, but at the same time give a sort of a pleasing shadow. So I thought I was being clever by actually bouncing light off walls in this movie, particularly the bedroom scenes. But it didn't work. It just literally flooded the place with too much light. So I have an RE here, an RE 650, and that's it there. And it's just kind of, I'm just using a small amount of that from the side. And then I have this LED here from Godox, and that's pointed up at the ceiling there, and it's on full power, and I've cooled it off with a little bit of gel because the ceiling is quite cream. And what it's done is, if you look around, it's kind of given the whole place a sort of a cool light. I think that if I went with sort of more controlled directional light, lit it better by being a bit more subtle and not using so much light, essentially. Here's a quick breakdown of the lighting I used in this shot. And action. So what I'm doing as I hop on the ground here when I call action is I'm actually switching on the bedside light and plugging in the RE light at the same time. Now the RE light is going to complement that bedside light and make it look like the bedside light is lighting Jenny from the side. So one mistake I made was actually lighting it there and then. If I had gone there without Jenny, without wasting her time, and literally practiced some lighting techniques just on my own, and just figure out what works, rather than leaving it by chance and getting there and going, right, I'm going to light this. In other words, do my homework. That would have worked better. Now, to do a really good short horror film, you have to have a clever plot.
Come to bed, Danny.
I thought mine was going to be a bit more clever than it ended up being when I watched it back. I just thought it was going to be a bit more catchy. It wasn't too bad, but I kind of lacked in cleverness. So that's one little thing that sort of went against me in this. There's a science to jump scares, and if you watch movies these days that are horror related and have jump scares, you'll probably notice that it doesn't come when you expect it. And one mistake I made was that the jump scare came when you expected it. Now, because the face I did, which I'll talk about soon, was quite demonic and quite good, it looked quite convincing, it still looked authentic, but I could have done it in a way where it would have got a way bigger scare. And that was the first big mistake I made. Come on. Jess, stop messing about. So if I was going to do this again, I would possibly change the whole jump scare scene. I could have possibly whipped it off and there's nothing there, and then it presents itself again, I whip it off again, there's nothing there, and now I'm getting really freaked out. And then one last time I whip off the sheet, I expect there to be nothing there, but there is something there. It's a demonic face. So the viewer is going to think that there's going to be nothing there because it's already happened twice. But then there is something there, and then bang, then you get a fright. So that would have been a bit more clever than what I actually did. Now, we all know that a good horror movie relies on a good scare, and that very often a good scare relies on a scary face of some sort. So with this, we didn't have access to much expensive makeup, and we didn't have time either. I should have possibly ordered some stuff online, but Jenny has an allergy to certain latexes, and I didn't want to complicate things. So what I decided to do was, I asked Jenny to put on a little bit of dark makeup, a few little streaks, very basic stuff, and I would do the rest in DaVinci Resolve, because the year previous I had to do the same thing. I was given no choice because I was doing a little movie for a client and they had no makeup. They promised me to have makeup done, but they didn't. So I sort of had to come up with this scary face thing in Resolve. And DaVinci Resolve is, as you guys probably know, is a very powerful piece of software. And it has this whole section to it called Fusion, in which you can do a lot of really cool effects. But oddly enough, I actually just used the main color grading page in Resolve, and I used different nodes and different tracking masks to apply that scary effect to Jenny. So I would have done individual circular qualifiers on the eyes, and I would attract those for the irises to make them whiter. I actually did the whole face, I gave it a mask, and I tracked that as well to give it a certain paleness. I also added a little bit of grain to the face, texture, through sharpening techniques, and maybe darkened out the jawbones, the eye sockets. So I had about, I would say, about 8 or 9 different masks tracking her face as I pulled the sheet off. And it worked remarkably well. So there you go, get yourself stuck into Resolve and learn how to do a little bit of scary stuff like that. It worked for me, and there's no reason why it can't work for you if you put in the practice and if you get a good shot, a good base to begin with. Jess, you're freaking me out. Jess? Okay, pregnant lady getting under the bed. For the under the bed scene, we used a little bit of fake blood. It was blood that I kind of had lying around. It wasn't that effective.
Was that supposed to be blood? That shit looked like Kool-Aid. Anybody want some?
Going at that again, I would have put a little bit more work into the damage that might be done to Jenny. The blood didn't look that good. I did try and color grade it. If you're going to go down the route of making, horror movies that involve effects and involve blood and stuff, again, like with the digital makeup, try and make it as authentic as possible. And even if that means me buying a kit or buying some effects stuff, so be it. So for the next one I want to do, I'll definitely try and make it a bit more authentic. Another big mistake I made with making this movie is the blocking of the scenes. The scene where she goes to the blinds and she figures out that the window's open and she recloses the blinds. It's not done that well in terms of cinematography. Could I have shot it better? Maybe I could have done one shot outside the house and showed the blinds closing from outside the house where you could see her inside. That would give the viewer a sense of loneliness and scariness again, instead of just having all these back-to-back shots of her up against the blinds. But a few things in the bedroom worked out quite well. The bed moves and Jenny gets a fright, and that worked out very effectively. I did this little Jaws style zoom in on her face with the camera. That was a handheld shot, and luckily the R5 worked out really good with that because I had the autofocus that locked onto her eye. It just created a sort of good little pre-scare to what's going to come up later. Some of the cuts in which I go to pull the sheet off Jenny just aren't nice shots. Looking back at it, I sort of cringe a little bit because I know I could have done better and I know it wasn't that effective. Now, I used the Canon R5, which I had just acquired for this movie. I'm shooting this on the Canon R5. I was very new to it. I was new to the codec, the RAW codec. I decided to shoot in RAW. So that ended up being a big mistake because I had only one card, and even though that card was 1 terabyte, it meant that I literally only had 45 minutes of content I could shoot. And as well as that, because the files were so big and demanding on the camera, it was overheating. So I ran into a little bit of difficulty with the whole overheating thing. I had just got the R5 and I shot it in 8K. I thought I was being very clever. I wanted to upload it in 8K as well. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it ready. It would not upload in 8K for me, even though I have a good connection here to the internet. But I had to revert back to 4K, so it's a pity, and it would have saved me a lot of work if I just shot it in 4K. And also, I could have probably shot it on the Panasonic S1. It might have been a bit better in low light. I thought the R5 just struggled a little bit in the dark scenarios, particularly in the living room scene, because I was using very little light. I was actually using the natural light from the TV as opposed to trying to create an artificial TV effect, because again, I was on my own and I didn't have the opportunity to do sort of, move around a few LEDs or something through some gels. If I had somebody, I could have done that.
Now, this next short horror film I actually found while I was searching YouTube to see what, original short horror films there are. And I came upon Come to Bed from Hugh Sweeney. The so crisp detailed the sound that is in Hugh Sweeney's Come to Bed is so different. If you don't wear headphones, you're not going to hear those little footsteps happening above you. You're not going to hear, the little laughter that happens or the little voice that happens.
When it comes to horror movies, sound is obviously a big thing, and sound involves obviously the dialogue from the actors. It also involves recording Foley, which would entail, footsteps, doors creaking. Everything from the light switch to the bed moving are authentic sounds, and it's always good to be as authentic as possible, wherever possible, with audio. Now, with this house, as it happens, it's all wooden floorboards. So I was blessed with just a natural sounding acoustics from the house itself. So I literally walked around the house. I walked on floorboards. I opened doors, I put teacups down, I boiled a kettle, and I did all these sort of natural sounds. I didn't get anything off the internet. I did get one or two small things, which I'll talk about in a second, but I was as original as possible with Foley. With dialogue, filming yourself, you don't have the option of getting a sound man. So it's literally a matter of getting the mic as close as possible to you. Now there's opportunities where you can actually dub it. If you know what you say, you can actually record yourself separately. But in a lot of cases, you can literally just try and hide the mic out somewhere. The mic doesn't have to be pointing down like you'll see in most situations. You can hide it. In one case, I literally, in the actual living room scene, I actually hid the mic behind my head so that when Jenny turned to me to talk to me, the microphone was close enough to her to get relatively okay sound. Plus it was dampened by the couch and stuff as well, and that led to a nice dry sound. So for the music, I tried to do my own original music with software called Thrill. Now Thrill is a brilliant piece of software. It sounds like those authentic horror movies like The Conjuring and all those James Wan sort of movies like Annabelle and stuff. It has that lovely, several violins going together slightly off key. And it's brilliant, and you can mess about with it yourself. You don't need to be a musician. You don't need to be talented either. But it is great to have something like that because it is original. You're not just plucking different sounds from the internet. You're actually using something that you created yourself. With horror movies or indeed thrillers or anything that's in any way scary, you will usually have sort of creepy drone sounds and maybe some different sound effects. To lead the viewer into a sense of dread. Now, I'm subscribed to a website called Epidemic Sound, and it was great because I was able to just download some different sort of spooky atmospheres. Now, I have a few different samples as well built up from my Logic Studio library, which are good quality as well. So it's always nice to have a few little layers of creepiness in there, and you can do that all in DaVinci Resolve. You don't need to use music editing software. When it comes to mixing down your audio, particularly your Foley and your dialogue, one very important thing is to listen back to the mix right, perhaps use headphones, and make sure that when you have different audio snippets, different, we'll say blocks of audio, that they're topped and tailed very effectively so that when you're listening back at high volume, you don't actually hear any hiss or anything coming in. You might have room ambience, there might be a fridge on in the background, air conditioner that you can't switch off. So you need to actually tail it in very gradually. And if you don't have that in the actual audio recording itself, if you get some room ambience, just record the flat room sound. It'll let you use a little bit of that background sound to gradually introduce the recordings, we'll say, in that space. So in terms of views, this short movie actually got, whilst I'm making this video, it has 315,000 views. It's earned me €300 in YouTube ad revenue. It's done relatively good. I'm sure if you're watching this movie now, you'd be happy with 300,000 views on a short movie of yours. It's enough to get it out there. It's enough for a lot of people to see it. It's not what I describe as crazy viral content, but it makes the whole thing worthwhile. Just on the topic of views, I want to mention a movie that I filmed quite a few years ago, back in 2013 in fact. It was a short horror film called Hello. I had very little experience when I shot this movie. When I first uploaded this movie back in December 2013, it was getting just a handful of views a day, but then it started to gather a little bit of momentum and it was getting, a few hundred views per day with maybe 2,000 or 3,000 views a week, which I was quite happy with. And that lasted for a while, perhaps a year or two, and then it suddenly dropped off again. But just watch what happens here. 5.5 years after I uploaded this movie, it started to gather momentum, and as you can see there, it's got, a few thousand views in a day. But look at this. In one day, actually, 6 years, almost 6 years after I uploaded this movie, it actually got 33,000 views in one day. Now, why did it start to get all these views? Well, one thing I did was I changed the thumbnail. As you can see here, the thumbnail looks kind of odd, and it's only a screen grab from the movie. I think that had something to do with the views. And even in June 2020, 6.5 years after the movie was made, it was still getting a couple of thousand views a day. Just look at that there. Today, if we look at the statistics, in the last 48 hours, it's got 1,700 views there. Now, let's have a look at the earnings. This movie has generated €1,000 for me. Bear in mind that I hadn't monetization switched on at all on this movie. And in fact, I only switched on monetization about here after it got that big surge in views. So perhaps this video started to get shared by people. Maybe it was something to do with the thumbnail. Maybe it was just the algorithm had changed. But it just goes to show that when you upload a video to YouTube, be patient. It may initially not do that well, but after a while, it may start to gather momentum. So I hope that you got a few little tips from this making of movie. It's hard for me to get everything across here. I have a lot of stuff coming in and out of my head, and I'm trying to remember how I went about this movie. But I do think I've shared from the heart the whole process that I carried out and what was involved for me as well. And I did learn a lot. And with filmmaking, it's all about learning. If I was to go back and do this again, I would really try and make it more scary. I would try and improve that jump scare and make it less predictable. I would also try and improve the blocking and make sure that every shot is cut nicely and just smoothly and goes together well. And I would also make sure that every shot is as creepy as possible as well, and use the nicest camera angles that might lend themselves to creepiness. So it was a fun little project. It's up on the internet. It's still getting views today, and I enjoyed it immensely. And if you're a filmmaker like me who loves doing this stuff, feel free to leave comments below on what you think yourself of that movie and where I could have learned. And if you have any questions as well, I'll answer them in the comments below. So thanks as always, guys, for watching. Until the next video, it's over now from me, and I'll see ya. Take care.